What's up, fellow music nerds? Matrix here, and you are locked into the Matrix Music Review Podcast, the only place to get your fix for alternative music. And we are back. Yes, we took about, I think, a two episode hiatus here. I was a little under the weather, couldn't even get into record, so sorry for the delay, but we're back. We've been reviewing a bunch of albums, and it's going to be a lot this week with albums. And then instead of doing a single review this week, I wanted to talk about something that kind of popped up in social media that I saw and really kind of sparked a thought process for me in terms of kind of the genre and our little scene here and where it's headed and kind of the way we classify things. So stay tuned for that towards the end of the episode. At Matrix Music Review for Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, stay up to date on all of our new releases, all of our playlist updates, everything like that. The playlist that we have for this Control-Alt-Save will be linked in the description of this episode, and make sure that you are sharing this podcast with friends and family, whether that's on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast. Be sure to share it with a friend or a family member and continue to grow our little community here. With that, we're going to jump right into our album reviews, and the first album that we are going to talk about is Guts by Olivia Rodrigo. Now, I know that hearing that album title and that artist is probably going to set some people off and make them say, well, hold on, why are you reviewing Olivia Rodrigo on an alternative rock music podcast? And it's very simple. There's two reasons. One, I'm going to review what I want to review. Sometimes it's going to be all in this alternative scene, and sometimes I'm just going to completely shock you with different podcasts that are going to be completely not alternative, but they'll be labeled as that. But for this particular album, I wanted to talk about Guts. And the second reason I'll say that I wanted to talk about it is because I feel like this is an album that is a little misunderstood, and I feel like Olivia is a little misunderstood as an artist. So obviously, when we got her first album and we heard Good For You, and people got the Paramore connection there. People thought that, maybe there was some copyright issues going on. Obviously, it ended up being a thing where Paramore got credit on the song and there really wasn't anything to do about it. But it kind of gave people a little bit of a feeling of, okay, maybe this is another young person that's really going to lean on this alternative music scene and really become a force in it. And I think as they listened to the rest of that Sour album, they realized, this feels more like a pop album. This feels like more, popish. But I think what Olivia does so well is that she doesn't come out and say, I'm alternative, I'm pop punk, I'm pop, I'm this, I'm that. Yes, the album itself is labeled a pop record, and I think that's a fair assessment, but I do think there are some alternative pieces in here that make us really think that this is an alternative record, and we can classify that in our reviews. And what it boiled down to for me is when I look at this album and when I listen to it, I thought to myself, if this was an album that we got from Avril Lavigne or Hayley Williams or somebody else, maybe like a newer artist like a Taylor Corn or maybe even like Lolo, if we got an album like this from one of those artists that we already associate with this scene, would we even be considering this to be a pop record, or would we even be having the conversation of should this album be included? And my answer was no, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It would get reviewed, it would get talked about, and that's that. So where this Olivia Rodrigo album lands for me is that the first track really just kind of proves a point for that. We have All American Bitch, and it really just has this angsty sound behind it. You get a little bit of the heaviness, you get a little bit of your electric guitar, a little bit of heavy drums in here. You get a lot of metaphors in this track that really kind of show you the songwriting prowess of Olivia Rodrigo, and I think that's really what stood out for me on this album was how well written these songs were. Now, I know that it's usually a team of her, and I believe his name is Daniel, in the writing process, and I know there's some other writers and producers that are involved with this, but I know that those are the two mainstays, and you can tell. I mean, they definitely have it down. They have their writing style down, and it's a really, really strong style. You know, you go to from All American Bitch to a song like Bad Idea, right? Which is a really classic take on getting that late night you up text and just knowing that it's a bad decision, but you're saying, you know what, it'll be all right. I'm just going to do it anyway. I'll deal with the rest of it in the morning. But for right now, I just need to deal with this and just say yes to it. You know, going through this album, I think one of the tracks that really stood out for me was Ballad of a Homeschooled Girl. And it's funny because one of the things that Olivia talked about in this song was social suicide. And I feel like social suicide is really becoming a common theme, not just in alternative music, but in music in general. I think there's a lot of this feeling of potentially doing something in the social media world or in the world that is going to cause your social status to just plummet. And so it's kind of interesting. And there's a line in this song that I really loved, and it says, "I talked to a hot guy, I swore I was his type. I guess he's been making out with guys all night." And it's just kind of a funny storytelling mode here from Rodrigo that she really just kind of nails. And I think that's why I connect with this album so much, and why I connected with Sour so much when that came out, is that it never feels like there's just this basic storyline. It never feels like you can predict what's going to come next. Like, these stories that she's telling are all stories that we've heard before. Like, these are all songs that we've heard before. These are all situations that we've seen songs about before. But for some reason, when you're listening to this track, you never know what road Olivia is going to go down and what road she's going to take for this. And that's really what helps this album flow from one song into the next, especially on this track that I'm talking about, Ballad of a Homeschooled Girl. This flows right into Making the Bed, which is a really introspective song about making decisions, and are they good decisions? Are they bad decisions? What are you going to do when you do with it? And again, it's just the writing on this entire record that's just so unreal and really sets her apart from some of these other artists that we're seeing, where there's just some basic writing, basic production, things like that. I think if I have to pick a favorite track off of here, and I don't really know that I have a strong reason behind it, I think it's Love is Embarrassing. And the last thing I want to touch on with this album is the album ender, which is a super emotional track. I think it's called Teenage Dream. And the story about it is basically her saying, "I'm sorry that I can't always be your teenage dream." And go listen to this track and just kind of understand what it's like to be a teenager in Hollywood and what it's like to be in the limelight this early on in your life. I think Olivia really hits that note and really drives home the point that it's not easy, and it's not something that everybody wants, and it's not even something that everybody can handle. And we've seen that time and time again. But overall, this album was a really, really spectacular album. You know, again, it's not going to be the most alternative record out there. It's not going to be a prime Avril Lavigne angsty album where you're getting song after song that really just has that alt style, but it has enough elements in it for me to at least talk about it. And I did ask everybody on Instagram if they wanted to hear a review of it, and a vast majority said, yeah, absolutely, we want to hear it. And so it's very easy for me to listen to an album like this. This is stuff that I love to do. Reviewing music is something that I love doing. And when we have an artist like Olivia Rodrigo that is so young and so talented, I think it's very easy to try and just kind of pigeonhole her into one genre. I think she's one that if she wanted to really lean in to this alternative scene, it could be a massive breakout. But I think at the same time, this is her second album. Like, the girl has done High School Musical, and she's done 2 albums, and both of them have been spectacular. I think this one's definitely headed towards Grammy nominations, even potential Grammy wins, depending on how everything goes this year. We'll get into that in later episodes down the road. But, Overall for me, this album is an 8.8 out of 10. It is very close to being a perfect record for me. In terms of alternative records, obviously, we'll have the debate later on in the year as to should we include it in the end of year list and things like that. But for right now, 8.8 out of 10, maybe even a 9 out of 10 for Olivia Rodrigo here with Guts. If you haven't listened to it yet, go check it out. Even if you're more of a hardcore metal person, I'm telling you, go check this out. You're going to love the writing style here. It's well worth a listen. Next album up is Out of the Shadows from Escape the Fate. Now, a lot of people will probably miss or probably have missed that Escape the Fate dropped a new album, and there could be a few reasons for that. One of them could be that it's just been an absolute overload of music recently that is being dropped and being released. So if it's not in your Spotify followed and it's not something that you pay attention to on social media, you may just miss it. But I think the other reason is that I feel like Escape the Fate is one of those bands that people have kind of just dismissed at this point. They are kind of just on the back burner. They're a band that everybody loved, way back when this pop punk genre was really taking off, and they were one of those underground bands that everybody loved. And now, it's been some years and they're still doing their thing, but people are just kind of not paying attention to them anymore. And what I'm going to say is come back, pay attention. Escape the Fate is here. They're still producing really strong work. This was a very solid album. It kind of feels a little bit like a return to form, or at least progression and growth for me. I feel like this is an album that definitely has some more personality than the last one that I listened to from Escape the Fate. And a song like Rather Be Dead shows all of those things that I just talked about. It's got breakdowns, it's got screams, it's got some modern production behind it, but it still has that classic Escape the Fate feel to it that makes it not feel like it's overly progressing towards something that's just not their own style. Another song on here that really stood out to me was FUN in Funeral, and there's an instrumental in that track around 135-ish that really stood out as such a fun instrumental, and I love the instrumentals throughout this entire album. I feel like there were definitely some solo spots where the instruments and the musicians really just shine through for this, so it's well worth a listen for that alone. If I had to pick a favorite for this album, I think it has to be Traumatized. A little bit smoother, a little bit softer of a sound to this one. Definitely talking about having demons and just don't come back to me because I have these demons and I'm just going to leave you traumatized if you do. And that's just kind of a sentiment that I think everybody can relate to, especially if, you've gone through some things or you're going through breakups and the person said that, they want to come back and you just feel like it's not the best thing for them because you know that the problem really is you. So definitely a relatable song here, and Traumatized from Escape the Fate. Overall, this album is a lot better than what we've gotten from Escape the Fate recently. I think the thing for me is it does kind of blend together a little bit and does kind of sound very similar. And I think that's what holds it back for me from being a little bit higher than what it already is. I think I'm going to put this at like a 7.5 out of 10. It's a very strong album, but it's one of those that I feel like is going to get lost in the shuffle for me. I feel like there's not enough on it that's going to make it kind of be on repeat. Obviously, those few songs are going to be on repeat for me. And it's kind of how I felt about Jaws of Life by Pierce the Veil earlier this year. Good album, nothing really wrong with it, nothing really that makes me dislike it or not want to have people check it out, but it's just something about it just didn't click with me for some reason, and that's okay. That's just my opinion. That doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just my personal opinion for this, but still a strong album from Escape the Fate. I think it's worth a listen, so go check out of the Shadows, the new album from Escape the Fate. Next album up is Ferality from UnityTX. This is probably one of the most interesting albums I've heard this year, and easily the hardest album for me to review this year in terms of opinion. And the reason for that is because it took me such a long time to kind of just wrap my head around UnityTX and their delivery and their style. It was one of those situations where I knew what I was hearing didn't sound bad, and I knew that I liked it. It was more or less trying to figure out how I wanted to really present my feelings on this album because I felt so strong about it. And I think the only way I can describe their music right off the bat is that it is serious mosh pit music. Like, every song that these guys deliver has energy behind it. It has force behind it. I can imagine being at a show and just watching people absolutely obliterate each other in a mosh pit to these songs, which is amazing. And I think we haven't had a band that's really just kind of focused in on that. So it's great to have that type of music here. And, you know, it's funny because I can't really remember their Mad Boy album or their Hellway EP. And I don't know if it's just because, again, there's so much music that comes out that I can't really remember everything, even from several years ago. But I think that was part of the reason why I couldn't wrap my head around it at first either, was because I couldn't quite remember what I had heard in the past. So I'm going to have to go back to those albums anyway, just to check back in and see if what I missed from them, if I missed anything. But I think this album is so strong and so good. You know, Burnout right away kind of gave me some nostalgia for Linkin Park. It really made me want more Linkin Park and want more bands and more artists to take those chances like Linkin Park did. It had that same type of production, that same type of echoey vocals with heavy guitar rips. All of it was perfect. And then you go to a song like Diamond Eyes, which has this haunting production behind it, and it flows right into one of my personal favorites, which is Power. And the flow of the lyrics in this is so perfect. You know, you get a line that's like, you say love hurts, but and so rip my throat out, so I can't speak your fucking name anymore. And that's just like, it's so heavy and hard hitting that you can just like feel it. I mean, like, you can hear me struggling. I don't know how to explain it other than it's fantastic. Like, this is so fun to have music like this that really... Honestly, sometimes it's fun to have music like this from UnityTX where there's not really a whole lot of thought that's needed for this. You know it's good. You know that there is some serious talent here behind the artist, and you know that they're poised for something big. You know, it's kind of like when you just go through this album track by track, you get an instrumental behind a song like Sting that's just out of this world good, and you get lyric standouts on a song like Killing Alchemy, which is amazing. And, you know, it leads into the kind of this overall feeling of UnityTX being this band that really is kind of on the verge of breaking out potentially next year. And, you know, later this year, I'm going to do a looking forward to 2024, and I'm going to do a big section on artists and bands that are really poised for a big breakthrough or break out next year. And UnityTX fits that bill for me. They have the style, they have the sound, they have the energy. All of it is working towards that really next level breakout. And I know they're doing some tours and stuff with bigger artists, which is fantastic exposure for them. Couldn't be more happy for that. In terms of a grade for this album, we're looking at like an 8.4 out of 10. It was that good. If you haven't heard it yet, go check out Virality from UnityTX. Next album is Slow Burn by Conquer Divide. So I don't have a whole lot to say about this Conquer Divide album. I do have to say that it hits harder than I thought it would. It definitely has this immediate punch in it in a song like Atonement, where they have a line that says, "How does it feel to be a filthy fucking rat?" And it's a slight screaming part, which is just such a heavy way to introduce yourself on this album. But it also, overall, this album has a perfect way of showing us that balance that I talk about all the time. Where if you're a band, even in this metalcore scene with what we have here with Conquer Divide, it's easy to kind of drift one way or the other, where it's we only do screams or we only do melodic singing. But this album's a perfect blend of melodic singing. It's a perfect blend of getting those heavy screams in there. And that's even on a track-by-track basis. There's a perfect blend. My favorite off of this is Pressure. It's got this killer chorus and great music and production behind it. It's so good. It'll be linked in the playlist for this pod. But overall, I think this album is strong. I think, again, I'm kind of getting overloaded with everything lately, and especially in terms of these metalcore releases. There are a lot of them lately for some reason. And I feel like Conquer Divide did a great job here. I just don't have much to say about it. I think it's a 7.8 out of 10. It's a strong album. It's just I don't have very much to say about them right now. So good album to go check out. Slow Burn by Conquer Divide. Next album is More Subtle Than Death by Fixation. My first real exposure to Fixation, and it was really a good introduction to them. I was really surprised by kind of their style and their delivery here. I think their first song that I heard, More Alive, really is a great commentary on what it's like today. And it's really a commentary on this world of social media and trying to be a celebrity and kind of what comes with it and these feelings that you're looking to kind of just plug these holes in your life. And, you know, every time you're hitting refresh, you're hoping that your bluff kind of takes was a line in it or something like that. And I think that's a interesting delivery from Fixation there, but the delivery style that I'm talking about is really just kind of fresh, and the way that the lead singer is delivering these lyrics, it's all about the kind of vocal inflections on different words, and that comes in a song like Stay Awake is a perfect example of that. There's just a lot of different ways to say a word and really get it across, and Fixation does a really interesting job of that. Like I said, it's a really fresh take on it, so that's why I really enjoyed hearing what they had to say. And you get a kind of Christian contemporary rock song in a song like Ignore Disarray. It just kind of has those thematic elements of basically like clutching a Bible, even though your sins could make that Bible, you know, be meaningless and things like that. So I love the idea of their track Claustrophobic, and it's basically talking about how you feel claustrophobic in your skin. And I think sometimes people can have that feeling. I know that it's something just about insecurity, just feeling just insecure in who you are and feeling like you can't get away from yourself. So all of these things were really interesting, really special and fun deliveries here from Fixation. Like I said, for my first introduction, not bad at all. They're going to land right on that 7.8 out of 10. Just like Conquer Divide. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go check out More Subtle Than Death from Fixation. And the last album that I want to just briefly mention is The Cure for Breathing from VOILÀ. Now, this is an album that I feel like I've heard a bunch of the tracks already, a bunch of the tracks early, so it's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around all of them together in one place. You know, the first track on this album is a collab with Kellen Quinn, and it's called Nevergreen. And if you follow me earlier in the country section of my podcast, when we did that earlier in the year, you'll notice that I had a song that I talked about a lot called Evergreen by Dipper, and these two songs sound really similar for some reason. And it's more in the delivery because Kellen Quinn's voice is so different. Go listen to both of those tracks, even if you're not a country fan. Just do me a favor and listen to the choruses of both of these tracks and tell me that it doesn't kind of sound like the same delivery of Nevergreen and Evergreen. And I just want to hear what you have to say on that. But it was a really interesting twist for me. Favorite off of this album by far is Table for One. And the chorus is just such a hard hitter. It's a fun sing-along track for that. I can see that being one that plays a lot in a car for me and just constantly can be on shuffle. You know, this is going to lead into the last discussion that I wanted to talk about before we end the podcast about genre things, but this really has more of a pop rock feel than it does a pop punk feel, and I think that's kind of enjoyable, and I think that gives it a little bit more commercial appeal. So 7.9 out of 10 for VOILÀ on this one. Really strong album. If you haven't heard it yet, go check out The Cure for Breathing from VOILÀ. Now, before I jump into this conversation real quick, I want to mention who my discovery of the week is. And the discovery of the week is a new artist, to me at least, Magdalene Rose. Crazy energy behind a song that she put out, I think it was 2 weeks ago. It'll be at the top of the playlist. And I'm really interested to kind of see the trajectory here. There was a band that Magdalene was a part of, GFM, and I want to go back. I don't think that I've ever listened to GFM before, but I'm going to go back and take a look anyway and see if I did. But that is our discovery of the week. is Magdalene Rose with her song A Bad Residential featuring Spencer Chamberlain of Underoath. So the last thing I want to touch on is something that popped up in social media either last week or the week before, and it came from either the Honey Revenge main Instagram page or it came from Devin's personal page, and it basically was saying everybody talks about pop punk this, pop punk that, but where's the love for pop rock like we are? And I thought that was an interesting take because she's right. I mean, basically everybody in this scene talks about like pop punk and this is a pop punk renaissance and this is that. And I'm guilty of that just as well. I mean, I've absolutely just said, oh, this sounds like pop punk. Oh, this sounds like surf punk, skate punk. This is more of a punk song. Like, I'm definitely guilty of it. But I think it brings up an interesting point. And I think it's something that, you know, maybe we need to look at definitions and redefining some of these genres. So I did a quick Google search for both of these genres. And this is what the definitions are based off of Wikipedia, you know, the most reliable source of information. So pop punk is basically defined as a fusion between punk rock and power pop, which can include real political statements and can be really emotional tracks. And pop rock is defined as a more professional style of writing that emphasizes the writing and it's less on attitude and more on the professional nature of it all. Those two definitions absolutely suck for both genres. Like, I'm sorry, there is no way that either one of those genres are correctly defined. And I think that the argument can be made that a lot of the music that we talk about on this podcast really is pop rock and not necessarily pop punk. But I also think that if you look at bands back in the day that were popular online and in the commercial fields, let's look at Fall Out Boy, let's look at My Chemical Romance, let's look at Paramore, let's look at even Green Day, right? I'm wondering if we started to say that this song or this artist was a pop rock artist, would that help get our little scene back into the commercial side of things? And so how do we basically get artists to start saying that this is what they are? It's really hard because most times people are going to say, I'm an alternative artist, I'm a rock artist. And most of the time it's rock that is the choice, right? I kind of just did a very brief experiment. When people hear that I do alternative music, sometimes they're confused. They don't understand what that means. And I say, oh, it's alternative rock. I said it's more like pop punk, and other people have classified it to people saying that if you had an emo phase, you'll love his podcast. Well, I appreciate that compliment, but sometimes that turns people off immediately because they automatically associate that with more of a screamy metalcore sound, right? And so where I did this little experiment to myself was with an older generation of people, like my parents' age. So I went to them and said, you know, oh, I do alternative rock. Like, what do you think of this? They're like, oh, alternative rock. Why are you listening to that? That's so weird. You know, that's all about, you know, like they better not be like doing drugs or whatever. And I said, well, here, listen to this song. And I played an Arrows in Action song, which I feel like is a really strong way to introduce somebody to the alternative scene right now, because they're not exactly the heavy side of things. And when they listened to it, they said, oh, I really like that. That sounds really good. And when I talk to people, and especially like my parents about this, I talk to them about bands that I may be going to see in concert. And when I'm talking about bands and I say, oh, I'm going to see Blink-182. Oh, well, that's not super bad. Oh, I'm going to go see Fall Out Boy. Okay, well, that's not super bad either. And I let them listen to a Magnolia Park song, or I let them listen to a First and Forever song. And it's like, oh, this isn't really that bad at all. This is what alternative is. I actually kind of like this and enjoy this. And I think it's because they hear punk or they hear emo or they hear whatever they want to hear and automatically associate that with problems. But if they heard rock, would their attitude change a little bit? So I'd be curious if listeners went out and asked their friends, family, whoever, pick two really extreme versions of bands. Like pick a hardcore screamer like Paleface Swiss and pick a really soft one like, let's say, Arrows in Action for this, right? Go introduce those people to that and see what they would consider both of those artists. Don't tell them what it is. Ask them what they would say if it's pop punk or pop rock, and see what kind of a response you get. Because I feel like the response would be different and they would feel a lot better if they were classified as pop rock. So just kind of a weird little genre thing. And again, this is a genre conversation that people have all the time. It happens almost every day in country music, where this is pop country, this is Americana, this is traditional country, this is real country, this is fake country. At the end of the day, who cares what you want to call it? Good music is good music. It'll always shine through, regardless of the genre. So that's all I really had to say on that topic. And I'd be interested to see if we started classifying some of our favorite bands as pop rock, if we started to get a little bit more commercial success. So last thing we're going to finish up with here on the podcast is, of course, tour announcements. I only got 2 for you this time. First one is their first headline tour, Honey Revenge, going on tour with Pollyanna and Colorblind. If they're in your area, go check them out. I'm sure Honey Revenge puts on a hell of a show. And then the second tour is Fall Out Boy is going on a second version of their So Much for Toward Us tour. And this time they're bringing along Jimmy Eat World, Hot Mulligan, The Main, Daisy Grenade, Games We Play, and Car. Tickets are already on sale. I already have mine because I could not control myself and couldn't wait until they probably went down. So next year, when we get Fall Out Boy concert in our area, you guys will get a review of that one as well. And that wraps it up for us this week. This was a fun week, a lot of good albums to listen to. I'm sure you guys are a little disappointed that we didn't talk about singles, but hey, head on over to the playlist and check them out. Control-Alt-Save linked in the description of this episode for you guys. Make sure you are going and following Matrix Music Review on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and stay up to date on the day-to-day workings here at Matrix Music Review. All of our updates for tours, what I'm doing. I got a couple of shows that I'm going to be at soon. Hope to see other people there. I know that one of the ones that I'm going to soon is a show with Friend Circle and Gabe Woodrow. They're putting on a show up in, I think, Haverty Grace, around there. So looking forward to catching them in tour. And as always, make sure you are sharing this podcast with friends and family. Help us continue to grow our community and continue to push this alternative music genre out there so that people understand that alternative music is here to stay. As we always do for my Spotify listeners, we're going to let a band play us out. And this week, I am going to go to UnityTX and their song Power to play us out. I will see you guys next week.